Thank you so much, Gil. I'm deeply honored by your introduction and to be here, as you and everyone can probably imagine. I'll say something about that in a minute. Let me just tear the last page of my outline out of my notebook so that you know I did prepare these remarks, especially for this event. I'm very pleased to be here and to see you all. Gil made reference to my having been ordained in this church 40 years ago last month, a momentous event in my life. I'll say a word about it. The Paulist Fathers, as anyone who reads Practicing Catholic will find, are the second best thing that happened to me in my life. The first best being Alexandra Marshall and our two wonderful children. But the Paulist Fathers have stamped me for life. I am the kind of person I am today because of the Paulists. And this book, this intensely personal explanation of my journey as a believer, as a person, to be brought to the world on this, its publication day, here at the, as we say, Mother Church of the Paulist Fathers. It's an astonishingly moving privilege. Thank you, Gil. I want to thank Father Brett Hoover also for being here and look forward very much, Brett, to our conversation. I've entitled my remarks tonight, The Story of American Belief. I want to say a few words by way of introducing this book. I don't want to presume on its focus on Roman Catholicism. I would like to think that this book is an instance of a person's making sense of the collapse of structures of order and meaning. And if there's ever been in our lifetimes a period, an experience of our broad collapse of structures of order and meaning, isn't it now? And one of the assumptions I make in this book is that we human beings have been through experiences like this before, again and again and again. And religious human beings have constantly responded in particular ways and understood their relationship to their beliefs, their foundational texts, their traditions, their God, in new ways because of such moments. And we're living through one of those moments now. And I'm old enough to claim the privilege of having lived through several such moments, and I'm going to briefly take note of them. I'm, in effect, going to lay out a few dots, assuming that you can connect the dots yourselves in some way. So it's, I am going to be talking about my own life as a Catholic, but I would like to think this is a larger story than that, a story that people of various traditions and people who have left religious understanding behind, a story that people of many different experiences can recognize as familiar. And I'd like to begin by taking note again of where we are. We're in the Mother Church of the Paulist Fathers, and that has particular significance. The Paulist Fathers, a small American order founded in the middle of the 19th century by a man named Isaac Hecker, whose mausoleum tomb memorial is upstairs in the church proper. This was Isaac Hecker's home, where we are. Isaac Hecker was an extraordinary person, not nearly well enough known or appreciated in the broad American public. He was a friend of Thoreau's and Emerson and Hawthorne's. He was a transcendentalist. He was a member of the Brook Farm community outside of Boston, a utopian experiment in spiritual experience and political order that was idealistic. It stamped the imagination of the American nation. We're still heirs to the transcendentalist impulse, as precious as the novels of Hawthorne and Louisa May Alcott and the great culture that found its home in New England. Brook Farm failed, and like the other members of it, Isaac Hecker went on, and he showed himself to be a true Emersonian, a true individual, by defying the broad sweep of his contemporary culture, by becoming a Roman Catholic, and then by becoming a Catholic priest and ultimately establishing this order of priests represented tonight by Father Martinez and Father Hoover and other Paulists who are here. Deeply moved to see my Paulist friends this evening. And what was remarkable about the Paulist father's vision, Hecker's but quickly picked up by his companions, was they understood themselves as standing between the United States of America and the Roman Catholic Church as a kind of bridge at a time when it seemed like there was an unbridgeable gulf between these two worlds. Certainly on the American side, a kind of nativist prejudice that could imagine nothing good coming from Rome. On the Roman side, a kind of suspicion of not only the Protestant hostility that greeted so many Catholic immigrants in this country, but the broad question about what was the true meaning of democratic rationalism, individualism. Weren't there great human questions at stake and at risk in America? And the vision of the Paulist fathers was that this nation could learn from the long tradition of Roman Catholicism, and that Roman Catholicism could learn from the democratic liberalism of this nation. And that took shape, actually, in the particular form of the Paulist mission, the Paulist spirit, which is what accidentally drew me to it 100 and some years later. When I was a college student at Georgetown University, I love to tell the story of my encounter with the first Paulist I met. All I knew at the time was that I did not want to be a Jesuit, the Georgetown being a famously Jesuit university. The Jesuit to whom I confided that kindly suggested I introduce myself to a visitor who was coming next week from a religious order I had never heard of, Father Jack Kelly, who lived in this parish and who was on the road recruiting young people like me to the Paulist fathers. And when I went into the small room in Healy Hall and introduced myself to him, the first thing I noticed was that he was wearing penny loafers. You have to understand that penny loafers on a priest was a violation of the natural law. And it was one to which I was instantly drawn. There was something about the claim to a kind of raw American masculinity. James Dean wore penny loafers. Penny loafers went with blue jeans, not with pinstripe suits. Penny loafers were the opposite of wingtips. Penny loafers were a declaration of, well, freedom. And lo and behold, what was Isaac Hecker's watchword but freedom? The freedom of, as he would say today, the Holy Spirit. I would rather suffer the excesses of freedom, we seminarians love to cite this, than the excesses of tyranny. That was Hecker. Well, not surprisingly, perhaps, Hecker was associated, although he was dead by this time, with a momentous event for the American Catholic Church, which took place in 1901, which is when Pope Leo XIII issued a condemnation of a heresy that was called Americanism. And it was associated with Isaac Hecker, actually with a French translation of a life of Hecker. And Hecker's ideas were taken in Europe as a kind of new statement of what was possible for Roman Catholicism. And the Vatican saw in this signals that were alarming. And Americanism was formally condemned as a heresy, outrageous ideas like the separation of church and state, the basic assumptions that lead to pluralism, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, the primacy of conscience. And you won't be surprised when I take note of the fact that much, if not most, of what was associated, if only vaguely, with the idea of Americanism was in fact affirmed by the Roman Catholic Church less than 65 years later at the Second Vatican Council, which ran between 1962 and 1965. And my thesis tonight, the story of American belief, is that American belief changes